I call the Tuesday, July 10th, 2018 meeting of the Portsmouth City Council to order. And tonight we'll have an invocation by Pastor Kurt Culpepper of St. Mark's United Methodist Church. And I'll ask my colleagues on council to stand for the invocation. And then Councilman Moody will lead us all in the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you.
Please take a moment and close your eyes, lower your head, and just let the stress of the day go. I will now pray. Wise and loving God, first, thank you on behalf of all who are gathered here today in this opportunity to participate in the governance of this city. Thank you for your many and abundant blessings to each of us. Thank you for life itself, for the measure of health we need to fulfill our duties, for sustenance to keep us going, and for friendship with one another even as we may find ourselves in disagreement. Thank you for the ability to be involved in useful work and for the honor of bearing appropriate responsibilities. Thanks as well for the freedom to embrace you or the freedom to reject you. In the scriptures you have said that citizens ought to obey the governing authorities, since you have established those very authorities to promote peace and order and justice. Therefore I pray for our mayor, the various levels of city officials, and in particular for this assembled council. I am asking that you would graciously grant them wisdom to govern amid the conflicting interests and issues of our times, a sense of the welfare and true needs of our people, confidence in what is good and fitting. Give them the ability to work together in harmony even when there is honest disagreement. In your most blessed name we pray. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I'll next ask my colleagues on council to indicate your presence by hitting the yes button. And Madam Clerk, we have 6 members of council present, and I understand that Councilman Smith will join us later.
Yes, sir.
Next, we'll have consideration of the approval of the minutes. We have the minutes of a call meeting of June 23rd, 2018, the minutes of a call meeting of June 25th, 2018, the minutes of a call meeting of June 26, 2018, and the minutes of a regular meeting, June 26, 2018. We'll consider all 4 sets of minutes in one motion. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Move for approval.
Second.
We have a motion that's been duly made and seconded to approve the minutes, all 4. Any discussion? All in favor of the motion, please vote yes. Opposed, no. And Madam Clerk, that motion carries.
Yes, sir.
At this point, Madam Clerk, would you read the protocol for speakers, please?
Yes, sir. City Council rules require a limit of up to 5 minutes to speak. As you approach the speaker's podium, you will notice a timer. At the beginning of your 5 minutes, you will see a green light. 4 minutes into your remarks, you will notice a yellow light. At the end of 5 minutes, you will see a red light, hear a beep, and we ask that you conclude your comments at that time. While speakers have an opportunity to address council on matters of public concern, all comments should be made in a manner that respects the seriousness of the forum and should not be made in a belligerent, sarcastic, or demeaning fashion. A speaker who fails to observe this basic rule of decorum will be deemed out of order and not allowed to conclude his or her comments.
Thank you, ma'am. The chair will now entertain a motion to amend the agenda to place on the agenda a matter that we tabled at our work session. And the chair recognizes Vice Mayor Simmons.
Yes, sir. I'd like to add an item to the published agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
And that item is the request from the
The
applicant.
item I asked be tabled from the 5 o'clock meeting, 101 Mount Vernon Avenue.
Okay, and it's been seconded. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor of the motion, please vote yes. The motion carries, and we'll consider this matter now. And Madam Clerk, do you have that in front of you? Would you read the request from the applicant, please?
Yes, sir. Eric O. Moody seeks to appeal the Historic Preservation Commission's decision to deny his request to return vinyl replacement windows that were installed using an incorrect certificate of appropriateness certificate on property located at 101 Mount Vernon Avenue in the historic Port Norfolk neighborhood.
We'll consider this matter now so that we can put it before us. Is there a motion one way or the other? I'm sorry.
I move for approval.
Second.
We have a motion that's been made to approve, which in effect is going against the recommendation of the,
Right.
yeah, okay. Everybody understand the motion? We'll now have discussion on the motion. The chair recognizes Vice Mayor Simmons.
Thank you, sir. I think it's always good to explain how and why we do the things we do. Since I was the one that made the motion earlier and asked if we could have a staff member go out to the property and let us be aware what windows were put where and what exists now, because we had a lot of conflicting information at our earlier hearing. The staff report we got just before the conclusion of that meeting was that the windows that are in place are not what was signed off on, and therefore I will be voting against this motion.
Any other discussion on the motion?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. My button isn't working. I'm trying.
Just raise your hand and I'll recognize you because we're having an electronic difficulty. Are you asking for?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes, I would ask my colleagues to approve the applicant's request as stated in the motion. We voted earlier to approve an applicant whose the vinyl siding was outside of the guideline. There was no permit issued, and we approved that. And I think it would be in fairness and consistency that we would approve this applicant as well. Also considering that there have been council members who have actually seen the property and have commented on the beauty of the property in the community. And I agree with Mr. Moody that as far as any type of penalties, that's something that we need to discuss at a later moment, and direct the city manager to come back and deal with those issues.
Thank you, sir. The chair recognizes Councilman Moody.
Thank you, Mayor. I think since we're in front of a different audience, I would like for a member of staff to show us what we're speaking about, reference the type of windows, the approved window, plus the window that the applicant installed.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Patton, would you have the appropriate member of staff make that presentation?
Yes, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of council, we will ask Mrs. Jocelyn Duarte to come forward, please.
Good evening, I'm Jocelyn Dumois, Planning Manager. I did go out to the site and I looked at the windows. And what we approved was a composite window with a three-part construction, okay? The three-part construction, you have your exterior grid, interior grid, and then a spacer. So when I went out to the site, I expected to see a window that looked like this, three-part construction. Instead, I saw a window that had a grid between the glass, and that looks like this. You have the glass, a glass, and then a grid between it. And that's inconsistent with what we approve. The goal is if you're not gonna put a true divided light, which show each individual pane, that you go back with something that's called a semi-divided light. That way, from the street, you have a look of a true divided light. Although it's a composite, but from the street, it looks like you have individual pane, opposed to having the grids between the glass. So based on going to the site and looking at the application, what is installed is inconsistent with what was approved.
Any questions? When, Dr. Whitaker?
Yes.
Questions?
Yeah. Mr. Duma, does that detract from the aesthetics of the community at all?
My focus is on the design guidelines, and I like all property owners to adhere to be fair. Everyone should adhere to those design guidelines, and when you take out a true divided light, we approve a semi-divided light. So that's what we look at.
Right.
Yes, it does distract. It looks like a piece of a grid between two pieces of glass, and that's not the historic look. Normally, a historic look is a true divided light or semi-divided light.
Yeah, because there were council members who said that the property looked very good.
On a new construction house, it's acceptable. But the goal of a historic district is to retain features that are unique to that district. And what's unique is a true divided light or semi-divided light, a grid between the glass. While it might be attractive, it's not historically correct.
So are there other houses in that community that have interior lights?
Yes, there are other houses that have the three-part construction. If we approve it, that's what we approve.
Right, so there are other houses that have similar windows as the applicant is using?
Given the fact that there is a historic district and we're talking 100 and some years, I'm sure, sir, yes, they are.
And have those been put in since it was a historic district?
I can assure you that the Historic Preservation Commission did not approve those.
But, so it is possible that they've been put in since the historic, since that historic designation?
It's possible.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Lucas Burke.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I would like to stress that in our reviewing of the information and the materials that were presented to us today, the guidelines in place had not been reviewed in some over 10 years, so I recommend that the Historic Preservation Committee go back to the table and take a look at those to make sure that they're in standing with current day times. And also, Attorney Moody had mentioned that they had received and completed the work. Mr. Young, contractor, had completed the work, and it was some 8 or 10 months before anyone went out to do a review. So I don't think that the Historic Preservation Committee has done their due diligence in doing what they needed to do. So I'll be voting in favor of the applicant today.
Thank you, ma'am. Councilman Moody?
And the other thing that needs to be done, and I think we've discussed it, and hopefully it'll be done during the rewrite, is the language needs to be tightened up. There's usage of may. To me, may is either or. This may be done. So we need a list, a simple list that these things are approved, these things are disapproved. And we need to show examples of them. The other thing that needs to be done, I think we need to get word out to realtors, to as many contractors as possible on what the parameters are, the permits required, so when they convey a piece of property or sign on to do work, that they're aware of what needs to be done. And I would think that would be accomplished during the permitting process. When they go to get a building permit, that they're given the information that you're doing work in the historic district. Here's a list of approved materials that can be done, be used.
I have a question for you.
Okay.
When you approved the window, did you do it in the presence of the applicant or his agent?
Yes.
Did you
provided-
show him the model that you're showing us?
I'm sure I did. I showed it to most people that come in to let them understand what's going on. And he did go to the Historic Preservation Commission meeting too, so, yeah.
Okay. Any further discussion on the motion? The motion is to approve. You want?
Yes, I just want to once again remind council that we have approved appeals of applicants who had items that were not in the guideline. Also, we just approved an applicant earlier. And so once again, I think we should remain consistent and approve this applicant.
Thank you, sir. Any further discussion? All right, we're ready for the vote. All in favor of the motion, which is to approve the applicant's request, vote yes. Opposed, no. And the motion passes. Thank you. We'll go to our next item, which is on the agenda. Which is a public hearing, and it's item 18263. And the first public hearing is CA 1802. And Madam Clerk, would you read the caption for this public hearing?
Yes, sir. Citywide, the city is proposing to modify Section 40.1-4.5F8 and other related sections of the zoning ordinance pertaining to food trucks operating in support of microdistilleries. The amendments will insert a microdistilleries into Section 40.1-4.5F8, food trucks on private property, along with microbreweries, and add a clause that food trucks can operate in conjunction with these uses in the downtown area. Planning recommends approval of this application.
Thank you, ma'am. Madam City Manager, would you explain this to the public or have a staff person do that, please?
Yes, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of City Council, Director of Planning, Mr. Baldwin will speak.
Good evening, Mayor Rowe, Vice Mayor Simmons, and members of council. As many of you may recall, back in the time when the food trucks were first introduced into the city code, included the zoning ordinance, we indicated we would likely be coming back on a fairly regular basis to make modifications. Some of them, as in this case, I will call housekeeping, to keep us compliant with the enabling legislation that's in the state code. When the food trucks were first put in to be able to provide service to microbreweries, the issue of microdistilleries was not on the plate at the time. Now that microdistilleries have become an issue, we're just basically updating the language of our code. So where, for example, we do have a microdistillery in town, they would also be eligible, either that one or others, to be serviced by food trucks. I think you're aware, one of the provisions that the General Assembly did in the microbrewery and microdistillery business is that is one place where the requirement to provide food is no longer required as it has been historically with other establishments such as bars and things of that nature. So again, this would just basically add the microdistillery in and just say the food trucks that are operating downtown could serve both microdistilleries and microbreweries downtown.
Thank you, sir. To my colleagues on council, do you have any questions to Mr. Baldwin? Councilman Moody.
Thank you, Mayor. How does this, what would happen in this scenario that a restaurant that under normal circumstances in the past had to sell X number of dollars of food in relationship to the alcohol sales to maintain their ABC license? What if that restaurant, instead of going to the expense of putting in a kitchen, which can be considerable investment, what if they say that I'm gonna take care of the food requirement via a food truck. Is that going to be allowed?
By this provision of the code, this is not, it's, in the downtown area, not applicable to a restaurant using a food truck. This is specifically being targeted to land uses which are classified as microbreweries and microdistilleries. So the presence of microbrewing and microdistilling on site is a requirement under this provision. It's not a supplement in a restaurant or a bar.
So if you sell alcohol, you can operate under this provision, but if you make alcoholic beverages, you can. Is that correct?
That's the way the General Assembly has it in the zoning enabling legislation, yes. Now, City Council, obviously, if they were interested, could ask us to take a look at allowing a more global application of food trucks downtown. At the time when the food trucks were brought into the zoning code, the interest was keeping that in a micro sort of a fashion, so primarily just serving, again, I'm talking downtown, the microbreweries and microdistillers, which by state code are not required to serve food, but have a demand for food.
I would think that somewhere along the line, the restaurant industry is going to weigh in on this and feel like that they're getting dealt in a much different manner than a microbrewery. I mean, you're talking the same thing, alcoholic beverages, just that one makes it and one doesn't have to invest in the kitchen. They can satisfy the food requirement via food truck, whereas the restaurant's got to invest in an expensive restaurant to satisfy the ABC requirement that X number % of your business is in food sales.
Right. And just to clarify, when it comes to food trucks, City Council has the authority to allow food trucks anywhere you want to allow them. What we have done, what City Council's approved in the past, is allowing a food truck to go to a location in which food is not provided by the establishment necessarily. For example, Momac, I'll use as an example, outside of downtown, where they are not a food provider. And so when you get microbreweries and microdistilleries downtown, this provision would allow them under the zoning code. Outside of downtown, you have a much broader allowance for food trucks. They can, on almost all commercial property, could be used outside of downtown. But in the downtown, it was City Council's desire to keep them in a more limited use under the zoning code.
I guess what I'm getting at, the problem's not with what we're getting ready to pass, but it's with the General Assembly and their requirement on what it takes to satisfy an ABC license for a restaurant.
Right. Well, their requirement, exactly. There's definitely a difference between the way the state regulates a distillery and a microbrewery from the way they regulate a restaurant serving alcohol.
Right.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you. Any further questions of Mr. Baldwin? Thank you, sir. You can sit down. Mr. City Attorney, this requires 2 readings, does it not?
That is correct.
Okay. With that, we'll open the public hearing. Anybody desiring to speak on this matter, which is an amendment to our zoning ordinance, whether you want to speak for or against, please come to the lectern, state your name, address, and you'll have 5 minutes. We invite you to speak on this matter. Any speakers on the consideration of council's amending the zoning ordinance? Hearing none, I declare the public hearing closed so that we can consider this matter. Is there a motion to approve?
Move adoption.
Okay, we have a motion to approve that's been duly seconded. Any further discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion, please vote yes. Opposed, no. And Madam Clerk, that motion carries, and this will be on the next agenda for second reading. We have another public hearing, UP 1803, and Madam Clerk, would you read the caption for that public hearing?
Yes, sir. Uptown Drew Patterson with PI Tower Development LLC is requesting a use permit on behalf of T-Mobile to construct a 150-foot monopole communications tower and fenced compound at 2015 Columbia Street behind Bob Ewell Tire. The property is owned by Neil Ewell trustees and is zoned heavy industrial. The parcel contains 1.28 acres and is designated within the mixed-use corridor on the Comprehensive Plan's future land use map. Planning recommends approval of this application with conditions.
Thank you so much. And we have now a tradition that we instituted recently where we ask the applicant to explain the proposal. And ma'am, I assume that you're representing the applicant. You have 2 minutes. Would you state your name and address, please?
Sure. Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and members of council. For the record, my name is Lisa Murphy, local attorney with an office at 4400 Monticello Ave, Suite 2200 in the city of Norfolk. I have with me tonight Eric Pera, who's the radio frequency engineer for T-Mobile, as well as Roger Hewitt, who is with NBNC, and he and Drew Patterson are the individuals responsible for identifying a suitable location for a tower site. This, as you may recall, is sort of a revisit of a search area where PI Tower Development, the applicant, has been searching to try to find a suitable location for a tower for the initial user, who will be T-Mobile in this case. As we've discussed at prior meetings, and as you all know from just your daily usage, wireless usage has increased dramatically over the last few years. In 2007, people were 16% wireless only in their homes. Now they're over 52%, and that's 70% for millennials. So not only do we have more users, roughly 3/4 of the U.S. now owns a smartphone, but we have all different uses. People can shop on the internet on their phone, watch funny videos. Virtually everything you can do on a laptop now, you can do on a cell phone, smartphone, and that's what most people do. So you've got a dramatic increase of usage, again, predominantly in residential areas, and then a high demand for data, which is why we're here before you tonight. So the history of this site actually starts with a search back in the fall of 2016. Some of you may recall a prior location that was on PRHA property that was across, if you go to the next slide, I think that shows you the aerial. Yeah, just on the other side of Westbury. You can't actually see it on this slide, but there's a location that PRHA owned, a small leftover piece of property that was a possible tower location that was deemed too visible. So that was withdrawn. And then the next application you'll see in that corner shape, whoops, go back to the other one, that was a heavy industrial property owned by Tony Goodwin and his family that backed up to Westbury itself. And we ended up, as you all may recall, withdrawing that application. So given that the need was still out there for T-Mobile to identify a location, Roger and Drew continued looking. The starred site that you have before you is right at the Bob Ewell Tire Facility. It's 2015 Columbia Street. It is also a heavy industrial zoning designation, which if we go back to the last one, sorry, the very first one, yeah. There you go. That shows you the IL zoning designation for the proposed site. Around it, you've got CSX, Vulcan Materials, other light and heavy industrial uses. As the staff report indicates, the closest residence is over 400 feet away. So we feel like, given the fact that there were no existing tall structures for T-Mobile to locate on, we went back to the drawing board, and hopefully we listened to your concerns and the concerns of Westbury and came up with a location that is much more suitable for a 150-foot communications tower. And as you all know, trying to find a location for a tower is a very difficult balancing act. You've got the technology needs and where that sort of drives you to have to place antennas. You've got federal law, state law. We have to deal with historic resources. For those of you who don't know, in the blue D2 form-based code area, not too far away, there are historic resources. So as a result, this particular site, the antennas are a semi-flush mount, and that was a nod to the Virginia Historic Resources, SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Office. So in sort of threading the needle and trying to find a location, as I mentioned, I think we've come up with a location Obviously, we have staff report. Planning Commission, it has recommended approval unanimously. This one, if you go to the next, there you go, that shows you the sort of aerial location of the site and the surrounding sites. The next slide shows you that same sort of funny triangular piece that has access off of Meander Road. That's the actual tower site. And then you can see at the top sort of the semi-flush mount. This tower will be built for T-Mobile as the initial user and 3 additional users. And we suspect that there will be a lot of need for other carriers to co-locate on this tower as well. I think the next slide shows you, there you go, these are the propagation maps. So that light green and medium green area is the big hole that we're trying to fill with existing antenna sites surrounding, co-locating on existing structures. And then the next slide shows you what it'll look like with this particular site on air, the antennas operating. Now what you'll notice is as we pull further away from Westbury, the coverage also pulls further away from Westbury. So this won't be an ideal solution for the entirety of the neighborhood, but this solution will help to fill in some of that hole and to provide good, strong coverage in the area. The next slide I think you have is these are the photo simulations. So this is a simulation of a 150-foot tower at the location with the semi-flush mount antennas, and then another slide. So you really get a sense of how industrial the area surrounding this particular location is. As I said, staff indicated that this complied with the comprehensive plan and the zoning ordinance. They recommended approval. Your Planning Commission has recommended approval, and we respectfully request that you approve this use permit application. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Before I ask Council for questions, I want to point out that we do have a court stenographer tonight. Mm-hmm. So for all speakers, Council included, please speak into the microphone. Any questions of the applicant? Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
I'll now open the public hearing on this application. Anybody that desires to speak, please come to the lectern, state your name and address. Any speakers, we invite you to come to the lectern. Seeing none and hearing none, I close the public hearing.
Second.
We have a motion that's been made and seconded to approve the application on its first reading. Any further discussion? All in favor of the question, please vote yes. Opposed, no. And Madam Clerk, that motion carries.
Yes, sir.
Which brings us to the City Manager's Report, item 18264, which is the consideration of the adoption of a certain ordinance. And Madam Clerk, would you read the caption of the ordinance, please?
Yes, sir. An ordinance accepting a public safety answering point grant in the amount of $2,000 from the Virginia 911 Service Board and appropriating said amount in the FY 2019 Grants Fund for use by the Portsmouth Police Department for training.
So that we can consider this matter as a motion to adopt.
Move for adoption.
Second.
We have a motion to adopt that's been seconded. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion, please vote yes. Opposed, no. And apparently we're having a electronic problem. Can we vote again? I don't think it registered. All in favor of the motion, which was to approve, please vote yes. Opposed, no. And the motion carries 6-0.
Yes, sir.
It probably registered and I didn't realize it. Which brings us to item 18265, which is the consideration and adoption of another ordinance. And Madam Clerk, would you read that ordinance, please?
Yes, sir. An ordinance accepting with appreciation a donation of $100 from Green Acres Presbyterian Church and appropriating said funds in the FY 2019 Grants Fund for use by the Department of Social Services to support operations of the Services Intake Unit.
So that we can consider this matter, is there a motion to adopt?
Second.
We have a motion on the floor that's been duly seconded to adopt. Any discussion? All in favor of the motion, please vote yes. Opposed, no. And Madam Clerk, that motion carries.
Yes, sir.
Which brings us to item 18266, the consideration of adoption of another ordinance. And Madam Clerk, would you read that caption, please?
Yes, sir. An ordinance accepting $554,000, I'm sorry, $554,762 in additional funding from the Virginia Department of Education and appropriating said amount to the FY 2019 Portsmouth Public Schools General Fund budget.
Thank you. So that we can consider this matter, so a motion to adopt?
Move for adoption.
Second.
Good. We have a motion that's been duly made and seconded, which is to adopt the ordinance. All in favor of the motion, please vote yes. Opposed, no. And Madam Clerk, that motion carries.
Yes, sir.
Which brings us to new business. Item 18267, boards and commissions.
Thank you, Mayor. There are no boards and commissions to deliberate tonight, although we do need board and commission members. If any members of the public watching this broadcast, we'd love to have you apply as a volunteer on one of our boards and commissions. You can apply online. You can also apply by calling the clerk's office, and one of the deputy clerks or the city clerk will step you through the application process. But love to have you volunteer. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Item 18268, item submitted by council members, and the chair recognizes Vice Mayor Simmons.
Thank you, Mayor. A couple of great things coming up before we meet again. Of course, our Sunset Thursdays have really taken off. If you weren't in downtown Portsmouth last Thursday night, you missed about 4,000 of your closest friends. It was quite a great event. Coming up this Thursday, the 12th, is the Tidewater Drive Band. July 19th is the band is called Second Wind. And on July 26th, it will be Island Boy. These concerts are all at the foot of High Street at High Street Landing from 6:30 p.m. to 9 p.m. Bring a chair. There's plenty of food and drink for purchase available. And then on August the 4th, which happens to be the Coast Guard's birthday, and you know we are a Coast Guard city, we'll be having the 4th annual Cutter 10K run along with the Coast Guard 5K, which will take off from the Union Bank and Trust Pavilion at 7 o'clock in the morning on Saturday, August 4th. And then later on Saturday the 4th and again on Sunday the 5th, we will have the Gospel Rama concerts, also free and open to the public. Bring a chair at the foot of High Street. And you know, all of these musical concerts are at the foot of High Street because the new Portside building is under construction at North Landing, or what we used to call Portside, and what we will once again call Portside, I guess, by the end of the year. So thank you so much.
Thank you. This brings us to item 18269, report on pending items. Dr. Patton?
Mayor, there are no pending items.
Thank you, ma'am. Which brings us to item 18270, non-agenda speakers. And we have two. The first speaker is Mark Godalgi-Otrowski, and sir, you have 5 minutes.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, honorable members of council, and fellow interested parties. I heard some very gratifying words in this chamber not very long ago, and they came from one of your colleagues. And it sounded like an excellent vision statement We want to encourage homeowners and help them to stay within the city. I am in complete agreement with that sentiment. And I believe that when you take from the table an item that was considered at the council meeting before last, if you vote to approve the rezoning in Portsmouth Acres, you will be doing just the opposite. You will be tearing a corner off a neighborhood that is residential in character and turning it into either a light industrial or a general mixed use, which is incompatible with the character of the neighborhood as it exists today. And I have to wonder if this is a cynical way of doing what you can't do some other way. The Supreme Court limited the ability of municipalities and governments generally to, well, it's really a municipal function, of municipalities to declare an area blighted and then take the entire area through eminent domain. So if you disrupt the neighborhood by the death by 1,000 cuts, you've already, your predecessors mostly, but council over time has already put in place or allowed to be put in place a multifamily development in Portsmouth Acres that was incompatible with what the character of the neighborhood was at the time. If you take this a step further, tear off a corner and make it a site that will house a convenience store or another permitted use under the revised zoning, then you are killing off the residential nature of the neighborhood and driving people out. That's undesirable. Your job, I believe, is to protect neighborhood quality because it is the residents of this city who give it its character and make it distinctive. These people deserve to live in a neighborhood that has consistent development within it and know that their homes will be surrounded by other properties like what they live in. So I would ask you, when you take that item from the table, that you uphold your duty to preserve and protect the Portsmouth Acres neighborhood. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Our next speaker is Donna Sy, and ma'am, you have 5 minutes.
Good evening. My name is Donna Sy, and I live in the Woodbine Farms neighborhood. One of my concerns since I have gotten involved with the local government in Portsmouth is, how are we, the people, self-governing? Looking at the structure of the city's organizational chart, it shows we, the people, are at the top. We tell the city council members and the constitutional officers what we, the people, need to have our physiological needs met, our safety and security needs met, our social and affiliation needs met, our esteem needs met, and our self-actualization needs met, not only in our family and our community, but also in our workplaces. The city council hires a city manager to guide community affairs with economy and frugality and the use of money, goods, or provisions of any kind, and saving unnecessary expense either of money or of anything else which is to be used or consumed. The city council appoints citizens to boards and commissions so they can advise and help the city council members to make decisions relating to finance and budget, economic development and land use, human services, health and education, including museum and fine arts, and public safety and transportation. Let's see how the organizational structure of the city works in real life. Let's look at the presentation given last night in the work session called Portsmouth VDOT, Virginia Department of Transportation Sign Program. Now, number 1 is edited because I got the news that the Old Town Business Association member came to City Council and requested information on the sign, one of the presentations on the sign. There's another question. How come this request from the Old Town Business Association wasn't given to the Economic Development Authority to do research, or even to the Planning Commission? The City Council bypassed the people by failing to use the EDA or Planning Commission. How can the City Council work with the Public School Division philosophy by applying the school's mission statement to engage all students and adults in learning that will foster academic excellence and responsible citizenship? In other words, we the people and students need to apply our learning because we must constantly make evaluations into our decision-making process. We the people are the local government. We need a system of checks and balances in place to prevent the abuse of power. So how did this presentation on the VDOT sign program get on the City Council agenda and not the Economic Development Authority agenda or the Planning Commission agenda? That's the question. Well, the question was answered earlier. The fellow came to City Council and made a request. Our organizational process was circumvented, and this is how we the people are not able to self-govern. Now let's evaluate the presenter and the information. Did this information provide us with knowledge and or insight of the VDOT sign program? Well, no, because I didn't remember what happened. What was the purpose of the presentation? What were the main takeaways to support the sign program? What were the ideas, date, and or content to support this program? What was the call to action? Now I need a private conversation to understand the point of the presentation. The second example to see how the organizational structure of the city works in real life is when a presentation by the engineer was not on the agenda. Not only that, he didn't have a PowerPoint presentation to explain what he was going to talk about. We the people need the organizational structure implemented so the people are able to be a role model, inspire a shared vision, challenge the old process going on now, enable others to act, and celebrate the values and victories of individual contributions, which creates the spirit of community. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, ma'am. We have no further business, and this meeting is adjourned.